This is 1, and where are we? This is 2. I'm going to do it the right way. Okay. Do we have everybody here? Okay. Everybody
Yes.
decided to join us today, at least. Okay. We're going to start. We're going to try to mute everybody. Let me see if I can help you guys with that. And I think we're good to go. Okay. Everybody see the slide, right? Okay, good. So today's class is sponsored by Susan in honor of the yahrzeit of her husband, Moshe Israel Alter ben Avraham Eber Sheva, whose yahrzeit is coming very soon on Zayin Sivan. And her mother, Chana Brana bat Harav Aaron ben Yitzchak and Minza, whose yahrzeit was just recently on the 17th of Iyar. And we hope that this, in the merit of this Torah class, those neshamot will have an aliyah. So thank you, Susan. Okay. In the last couple of weeks, we spoke about the similarities between David and Yaakov. And we spoke about the family, we spoke about Michal and Rachel, and we spoke about the relationship that David and Yaakov had with their brothers and all that kind of stuff. We spoke about that in the last couple of weeks. And today, what I would like to do is to continue that parallelism between David and Yaakov, but in a very narrow, through a very narrow prism, in a very specific incident. Okay? I want to talk about the story of Naval HaKarmeli. Don't worry, I'm going to summarize that and compare that with Lavan, father-in-law of Yaakov. So let's just kind of refresh our memories. I know we spoke about that in the past, but just to refresh our memories, what's going on. Okay, when it comes to Yaakov, so we're talking about right after the birth of Yosef, Yaakov decides to go back to Eretz Israel. Lavan and Yaakov reach an agreement in terms of the payment for all those years that Yaakov watched. The sheep of Lavan was the shepherd of the sheep of Lavan. And the agreement is that all those spotted and, akudim, nekudim, uvruim, teluim, all those spotted and whatever, perhaps different color sheep are going to be the payment of Yaakov for all those years working for Lavan. Fine. Lavan take out all those sheep, take them, separate them from the rest of the sheep, because the idea is genetics. Very simple. If a sheep that has spotted, brown spots and that kind of stuff, chances that they will give birth to such babies as well. And he wants to prevent it, so he separates them. Okay. But at the same time, Yaakov, who's been a shepherd for 20 years at least, probably knows one or two things about sheep at this point. And while watching the rest of Lavan's sheep, and in spite of the genetics, he causes them to give birth to sheep that are akudim, nekudim, uvruim, tluim, in those, they have those spots or colors as they agreed is going to be the payment of Yaakov, and he creates for himself this flock. Then Yaakov hears that the gossip that especially family members and people are talking, that that Yaakov allegedly took advantage of Lavan. And because of Lavan, he made his prophet, which is not true. And he sees and he sees that the face of Lavan, meaning the relation, the way Lavan looks at him, it's not like as in the past. And God appears to Yaakov and says to him, it's time to go back to Eretz Israel. And Yaakov calls his wives and explains that their father looks at him kind of in a crooked way, and also God told him, go back to Eretz Israel, and they agree. And the family goes into the journey, goes to Eretz Israel without telling Lavan. Okay? Of course, we spoke about that in the past several times. This is also the story of the Terafim. Rachel steals the Terafim, the idols or whatever of Lavan. Lavan doesn't know about that. And of course, Lavan later on is going to come, and allegedly that's going to be his excuse, at least going to try to search for those Terafim and accuse Yaakov, why did you run away and you stole my God, etc. Okay, so the family left. 3 days later, Lavan finds out that they left. He was away, and he starts running after the family. And just before they meet with Yaakov, with the family, God appears to Lavan in the dream and tell him, be careful, don't do anything that might harm Yaakov or whatever. There's a dispute, they meet and he said, why did you cheat me, blah, 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 why did you leave this way, all that kind of stuff. At the end of the day, they reach an understanding, an agreement that allows the family to continue on their journey to Israel, and Lavan goes back to his place. Okay, that's the story of Yaakov. We are familiar with that story. On the slide that you see, it's the story of David and Naval. Very quickly, what's the story? The story opens with Naval and his wife Abigail. They live in a place called Ma'on, which is in the territory of Yehuda. Naval is depicted as somebody rich but corrupted, rude, disgusting person, and Abigail, his wife, is depicted as somebody who is smart and also beautiful.
Excuse me, I just want to let you know that all people in Tel Aviv are in the shelters now.
Yeah, I know.
I just heard it. Oh my God. Nobody answers the phones because they're in the mamadim.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, sorry. Okay, I'll mute myself.
Thank you. Naval had people doing that for him, obviously. His shepherds took his flocks, his sheep, to an area called Carmel, which is not very far from Ma'on, where they lived. And when it was time for shearing of the sheep, there was a big feast, there was a big party, as was the custom of that time. And David, who was hiding from Shaul, running away from Shaul at that time, it was there in Carmel, and he heard about all these festivities of Naval. And what he did, he sent messengers to Naval. And those messengers had a request. David's messengers sent a message to Naval saying, listen, when your shepherds were in Carmel, David and his people were there as well, and they protected Naval's shepherds and flock. Now, David is asking through his messengers for a payment. He's asking for food. Naval refuses, and he dismisses them with an arrogant reaction, response, and he humiliates them. And of course, those messengers go back to David and they report to him, and David is not willing to accept that. And he tells his men, put on your sword, we're going to revenge. In the meantime, Abigail, Naval's wife, she hears about what's going on, and she understands that David is planning to come and revenge, and she acts very quickly and with a lot of wisdom. Without the knowing of Naval, okay, what she does, she takes donkeys, she packs them with food and drinks and all the good stuff, and she goes towards David. They meet on the way, and Abigail gives David that present and convinces him to avoid bloodshed. David accepts the present and he accepts what Abigail has to say, and David goes back to his camp. Abigail goes back to her home. Her husband Naval is drunk, so she doesn't tell him anything. The next morning, when he wakes up after slipping off his, from being drunk, she told him what happened, and he's shocked, and he is, the text says, "Vayamot libo bekirbo v'hu haya le'aven," had either a heart attack or a stroke or something like that, because of the news that he heard what his wife did. And 10 days later, he dies. And not only that, he dies also, it's by God. God killed him. David hears about it and he thanks God for avenging. And without David needing to shed any blood. And after Naval dies, David marries Abigail. Okay, these are the two stories. Let's see the parallelism. Let's see the similarities between the two stories. In both stories, we're talking about somebody who's guarding with great care the sheep of another person. Right? Yaakov is guarding the sheep of Lavan, and David is guarding the sheep of Naval. In both cases, the flock is very well taken care of. Okay, the Psukim says that you haven't lost any sheep, and they're in great condition and all that kind of stuff, and through a lot of sacrifice on my part. Fine. Third point, the shepherd Yaakov, or the guard David, complains about unfairness in pay by the owner. Right? Yaakov says, "Lama rimitani? You deceived me. We had an agreement, but you deceived me." When it comes to David, it's also, David claims that for his protection, he is eligible for payment. Next, the dispute peaks during the time of the shearing in both cases. And the last point, that Hashem interferes after 10 days. In the story of Naval, I just said that God interferes after 10 days and kills or let Naval die because he is basically in coma for 10 days. But in the case of Yaakov and Lavan, so just make the calculation. Lavan hears about the fact that the family left after 3 days, and then he chases him for another 7 days. So usually 7 plus 3 is 10. And in that, after 10 days, what happened? God interferes, and God appears to Naval in the dream. Okay? Not only that we find those similarities, but Chazal take it another step. And Chazal says in two different midrashim, Ke'otiyot Lavan, ken otiyot Naval. If you look at the letters of those two names, Lavan and Naval, you'll see it's the same letters in different order. Shehu domeh b'ma'asav leLavan. Because Naval is similar to Lavan in his actions, meaning both cheaters. And in a different midrash, they say, hu Naval, hu Lavan. Ma Lavan haya ramai, af Naval haya ramai. Meaning both Lavan and Naval are deceiving, cheaters, and this is the similarities between the two of them. Fine. Now, even though we see all those similarities and Chazal points us in that direction, etc., there's a very interesting question that comes from that. There's a tremendous difference between the two. Yaakov was legitimately working for Lavan, right? That was clear. Okay, so Lavan is not honest and he cheat, blah, 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 whatever. But what about the case of Naval and David? Here, we didn't see anything that actually Naval asked for protection. He didn't ask for anything. So David comes and he says, well, I protected your sheep, now pay me. Oh, I didn't ask you to do that. It's a very thing, it might be, it's a nice thing to do, and I thank you for that, but like I didn't hire you. Okay, so why, if that's the case, maybe Naval is not so terrible at the end of the day. Nonetheless, the text is very, very clear about the character of Naval. Here's a couple of quotes, right, that describe him. First of all, from the very beginning, he is called Kasher ve'ro'a ma'alalim, a hard man and an evildoer. Okay? Then, when David approaches him with a lot of, tact and in a very respectful way and asks for help, but Naval, his reaction is very, very rude. He says, Mi David, umi ben Ishai, who is this David? And who are you to come and take my water and my bread? Okay, he's very rude. Another point. Naval doesn't even bother to ask his shepherds if David's claim is right or not. Okay? Actually, the shepherd says the following: the man had been very friendly to us about David's people. We were not harmed, nor did we miss anything all. And he doesn't even bother to check whether the facts are correct or not. Later on, the shepherd, meaning Naval's shepherd, expresses his opinion of Naval, of his master, in a very clear way. He says, he is such a nasty fellow that no one can speak to him. That's his own employee says that. Okay? Now, even Abigail, his wife, says something about her husband. For he's just what his name says. His name means boar, and he is a boar. And at the end, the final point is, even God recognizes that and kills him. The Lord struck Naval, and he died. So a very strong message that this guy, Naval, even though we would think, you know what, maybe there's some truth to his claim towards David because he never asked David. Well, the fact that the text shows him in such a negative way tells us the story that means that he is a very rude and corrupted and evildoer, as they say. Fine. But alongside Naval's behavior and his punishment, also we see the criticism of the text also on David. In other words, yes, Naval is a horrible person and he acted in the wrong way, but David is not clean. David is not all righteous here. Let's take a look at that. When David hears what Naval says, his initial reaction is what? כה יעשה אלוהים לאויבי דוד וכה יוסיף אם משאיר מכל אשר לו עד הבוקר משתין בקיר. By the light of morning I will leave a single male of his, I will kill them all. Oh, this is kind of disproportional. It's hesitant. It's not hesitant. He has no doubts. He doesn't even try to check the facts. This is not what we expect. That's not the reaction we expect from a leader. Now, Abigail has to do a damage control here. And she explained, this is not good for you. And she said, do not let this be a cause of stumbling and of faltering courage to my Lord, that you have shed blood needlessly. Okay, and she speaks on and on and on and on. And indeed, she's able to convince David. And his subsequent reaction, blessed be you yourself, he says to Abigail, for restraining me from seeking redress in blood by my own hands. In other words, we see that his reaction would have led to a catastrophe, if not for the wisdom of Abigail. So there's a criticism on David here. Not only that, the text takes it even another step. And if you remember, up until now, we compared David to Yaakov all the time. Now we're going to flip it completely. In other words, up until now, if we saw David parallel to Yaakov, and in this particular case, Naval parallel to Lavan, now we're going to do is, we're going to look, we're going to compare. Abigail is going to be compared to Yaakov, okay, in the meeting of Yaakov and Esav. So that means that David is what? Esav. Okay, let's take a look at that similarities. Both Abigail, right? Both, I'm sorry, both Yaakov, no, the opposite. I have to remember. Now we're comparing David to Esav and Abigail to Yaakov. So it's not David with Yaakov, it's the opposite. Now we're going to depict David as the guy that does wrong, right? The David is Esav now. Okay, both David and Esav going to the meeting with 400 people. They're being accompanied with 400 people. Do you think it's just a random number? I don't think so. Okay. Also, David walking towards Abigail, walking towards David is very similar to Yaakov walking towards Esav, right? And they use the same language, Ivru lefanai, right? Yaakov says to his servant, Vayomer lavadav ivru lefanai, va'amartem gam hine avdecha Yaakov acharenu, you know, pass, go in front of me and say that Yaakov is behind us. And also Abigail says, Vatomer lena'area ivru lefanai hineni me'acharechem ba. She says also to her servants, go in front of me, I'm behind you. Okay. Yaakov uses the terms of your servant, my master, when he speaks to Esav, and in a similar language, we see the story of Abigail. She also says, Adoni yodea, ya'avor na Adoni, bi Adoni he'avon, tedaber na amatcha. Okay, master and a servant. It's very similar language. Think it's similarities? I think there's a coincidence? I don't think so. And then also both Yaakov and Abigail call the goods, the present, they call it beracha. Kach na et birchati asher uvat lach, says Yaakov to Esav, and Abigail says, ve'ata haberacha azot asher hevi shivchatecha. Almost the same language. And there's no doubt that this similarity tries to show the negative aspect of Yaakov, of David here. Okay, kind of adds to the general impression that we have that David's initial reaction was exaggerated. Okay, here in a metaphoric way, David walks or acts like Esav and not like Yaakov. And perhaps there's another hint here. Two people are called Admoni, redhead. Esav, Vayetze Arishon Admoni, and also David, Vehu Admoni im Yefe Enaim Betov Roi. Okay, so there's a hint that in that redhead, David, this temperament is hiding there of somebody who is quick to pull, somebody who is like, not, something reacts very harshly and very quickly without thinking, without self-restraint. And it seems that that's what Chazal also talk about in the Midrash. The Midrash talks about, and we spoke about that, the point where Shmuel comes to anoint David. So here's the Midrash says, "Vekevan שראה שמואל את David, when Shmuel saw David, Admoni, he saw that he is a redhead, נתיירא." So Shmuel feared. Amar, אף זה שופך דמים. He said, this is going to be a person who is also a blood, he's going to shed blood. Meaning, in his terminology, he's going to be like Esav. אמר לו הקדוש ברוך הוא, אם יפה עיניים. So God told him, yeah, he's a redhead, but with good eyes. What does it mean? Esav midat oreg, אבל זה מידת סנהדרין oreg. Yes, perhaps they have similar temperament, right? But here's the difference. The difference is that Esav goes and kill based on his own inclinations and his own motives. David is going to kill, and yes, you need also certain character for that, but he does that based on the decision of the court. Okay? Have that in mind because it's going to develop this idea. Meaning, a character trait doesn't mean it's the end of the day. It's the end of things. A character trait meaning it's something that can be cultivated to the right or to the left in a negative or in a positive way. And perhaps that's what we see in the other midrash as well. אמר רבי שמואל בר נחמני, אמר רבי יונתן, מהי דכתיב? נאום דוד בן ישי ונאום הגבר, הוקם על נאום דוד בן ישי שהקים עולה של תשובה. What's the greatness of David? We spoke about that in the past as well. It's not that he is perfect. David sins. David falls. But David is the ultimate Baal Tshuva. David is the one that repents. Okay? So this story, that little story of Naval and the whole thing with David is here to highlight his personality. Remember, he's doing tshuva. He listens to Abigail and decides not to act. He was ready to kill, but he stopped himself in the last minute. But it highlights this part of his personality that says that what? He's got this constant battle with his inclination, with his yetzer. Okay. Later on, David is going to fall. He's going to sin with Bathsheba, with the census. We talked about it, and other times. Okay. So in those incidences later on, nothing stopped him at the time of the sin. And later on, the prophet is going to come and say, David, you've done wrong. And he's going to say, yes, I've sinned. Now I'm going to try to fix it. He takes responsibility, takes ownership, and he's going to try to fix it. and he recognizes the sin. In our case, somebody else, in this case, Abigail, was able to stop him at the last minute. He listened. Okay? And the greatness of David, it's that character trait, meaning it's not that he is perfect. He's not. He's far from perfect. But when he sins, he takes ownership, he repents, and he tries to create a tikkun, to repair. And that's shehekim ola shel tshuva. And that's the idea. He is the ultimate, through his actions, he taught the power of repentance. And this idea, this character, this temperament of David was something that the commentators dealt with. Here's the Malbim. The Malbim says the following. You have the English here. פה הראה לו אמיתת מה שאמר תחילה, כי לא כאשר יראה האדם, כי דוד היה אדמוני שגברה בו האדומה, והוא בטבעו מוכן לשפיכת דם. David, because of his nature, he has this constant battle with himself, and guess what? He's ready to shed blood. ומצד אחר נראה בו גם כן רשמים טובים. However, on the other side, on the flip side, it has like good characters. כי היה יפה עיניים. יפה עיניים is somebody that has good eyes. That means, the opposite of somebody who's going to lose his temper. וטוב רואי, שזה מורה על שהוא חד העיון. That means that what? That he can be leveled. וטוב המזג, and good character. כמו שאמר הטבעיים. ואם היה נשאר על ההבחנה האנושית של שמואל, היה מחליט היותו בלתי ראוי. And if Shmuel would have been relied only on what he himself sees, unlike God who can see into the heart, Shmuel would have said, he's unworthy. Because I see his character of being reckless, as being not leveled, somebody who's got this temperament. אבל השם יראה ללבב, וידע כי מיתו בחירתו יעשח משפט וצדקה. But God who sees into the heart, right? He says that he's going to make the right choices. He's going to do justice. ובטבע הדמימות הנטועה בו ישתמש ללחום מלחמות השם. But he's going to use that character trait of the redness to fight, but the right war, the wars of God. ולהחריט מאיר השם כל פועלי אבן, in a constructive, positive way. וזה הנרצה בעיניי השם שגם שהנמצא נטייה רעה בטבעו, הוא ימשול בה מצד צדקתו וטוב בחירתו. And that's what God wants from us. That's what God wants. That when he finds a bad, it's not only about David, it's every person, he or she finds a bad inclination in he or her nature, that person will rule over it on the part that of his righteousness and goodness of his choice. In other words, you have a choice. You need take control of your actions. Don't give me an excuse. Oh, you know what? I'm a redhead. I have this tendency. I have a character flaw. There's nothing you can, I'm sorry, that's the way I was born. It's in my genes. No. That's the message. And this idea of human nature appears also, of course, in the Talmud. I'm going to bring this long part from Masechet Shabbat. I don't want to go into all that stuff. Perhaps you can read it in English here. At some point in the future, we can delve into that one. It's a fascinating passage from the Talmud. In any event, and you can look some examples. I kind of highlighted the color so you can see. The Gemara here talks about, if somebody is born on Monday, he'll be a short-tempered person. Why? Because the nature of Monday, it's a day of continuousness. If somebody is born on Tuesday, he'll be rich and promiscuous. Why? Because on Tuesday, mixed together without boundaries. It goes obviously to the story of creation. There's a tendency, there's a character to the day, and that affects somebody's character. That's what the Talmud says, etc., etc. About a Wednesday, somebody's going to be wise and enlightened. because wisdom is like the light, and the luminaries were created on Wednesday. Somebody was born on Thursday is going to perform acts of kindness, because what? On Thursday, sustained by the kindness of God, all the animals. And somebody who was born on Friday will be a seeker. Okay, whatever. Friday involved the preparation for Shabbat. Somebody who's born on Shabbat is also, it's a day of great sanctity and a sacred day. Okay, all that kind of stuff. Similar way, if somebody was born in a certain mazal, i.e., in a certain month, it's in different. It's a similarity to astrology. You know, in the sun, in the mazal, in the month of sun, will be radiant person. If somebody was born in the mazal of Venus, will be rich and promiscuous. Somebody was born in Mercury is going to be enlightened and expert. The mazal of moon, of the the moon will suffer pains, etc. Saturn, not okay. It's a fascinating Gemara, and we should definitely at some point analyze that and try to understand what's going on here. I just brought it as an example, but I want to go right into the end of it. One who was born under the influence of Mars will be one who spills blood. Okay, that's they call mazal dam. Rav Ashi says he will be neither bloodletter or a thief or a slaughterer of animals or a mohel. Rabba said, I was born under the influence of Mars and I do not perform any of those activities. Abaya says, my master also punishes and kills as a judge. Okay, so in other words, the Gemara says that if you were born in a certain day or you're born in a certain month, it's going to impact your basic character. It's going to perhaps even lead you in a certain way. But it's very, very important to remember what Chazal says. And Mazal Israel. Mazal, astrology, whatever you want to call it, all that stuff, do not control the Jewish people. Meaning, by the right work, by the right approach to life, by the right choices, we can take that mazal and refine it and divert it and work it out in a way that's going to be positive. Yes, perhaps you have a tendency to spill blood, but you know what? You can be a murderer, but you can also become a surgeon. You can be a moel, or you can be, a violent person. There's nothing wrong with being a doctor. On the contrary, you can take any character trait and put it into a positive way. Okay, let's talk about David for a second. David has this character. He is impulsive. He is not afraid of. He's jumping the gun. He's all that. We need people like that are gonna go and fight. Remember the story of David and Goliath. Here's this little pisher. The Goliath is this giant, and David is the only one who's got guts to go and confront him. You need people with that courage. If everybody's going to be leveled and think about things through and all that kind of stuff, then we're not going to have anyone who's going to be willing to fight. But the point is, you need to fight the right fight, not to fight the wrong fight. That's in your hands. Okay? So we have, on one hand, we have, let's call it the nature of somebody, the DNA, perhaps you want to call it. But we have also decisions that are based on logic and taking into account the circumstances, which brings us to the question, what actually causes us to behave in a certain way? What drives us? And modern psychology has three approaches to explain that. But as we're going to see very soon, the Torah has even a more complex outlook than modern psychology. The Torah is actually going to use all three approaches together and says that's the meaning of being a human being. That's the meaning. All that stuff is what makes us make our choices, what determines how we're going to react to a certain situation. Let's start. The first approach in psychology called behaviorism. Okay, we know all that what it means. It means reward and punishment. If I'm going to do something and I'm going to be rewarded in a certain way, oh, I'm going to continue doing that. If I'm going to do something and that act is going to result in punishment, then I'm going to refrain from doing that activity. Okay, so consequences determines the behavior. I'm going to behave based on what my prediction is going to be. Like, what's going to happen? If I'm going to do X, what's going to happen? What's going to be the Y? And based on that, I'm going to decide how I'm going to behave. Rewards increases that behavior, right? In certain behavior, and punishment decreases that behavior, right? And we understand that. Okay. The other approach is the approach of the psychoanalysis. And the psychoanalysis says, no. What drives us, what makes us do what we do is not necessarily because of the outcome of your action, but rather it's a constant tension between primal urges and constraint of moral, social, acceptable, unacceptable behavior, etc. Okay, somebody said something to me, I'm upset, I want to hit my boss now. He said something to me and I don't want to hit him. Well, that's my urge. I want to hit him. Well, I'm not going to do that. Okay? I'm not going to do that because that's not the way we act in a society. Right? There's rules. So what I want versus what is permitted or acceptable. And psychoanalysis claims that there's all this tension. Okay, somebody who becomes violent and loses his temper or whatever, do all that stuff, it's because these urges, those primal urges, were stronger at that point. But if I'm able to constrain myself and actually do what is the norm, the social, the moral behavior, it means that I was able to control my urges, right? That's psychoanalysis. What about the third approach, humanism? Humanism says, no, it's a whole different thing. It's about purpose. Oh, you got upset for your boss? You want to hit your boss? Okay, let's figure this out. For what for? How that's going to help you? How that's going to help you? And if I determine that it's not going to help me because I'm going to lose my job, then okay, so don't hit your boss. Right? Behavior is determined by self-actualization. But what do I gain from that? Okay? So these are the three main approaches. In a way, you can summarize and say that behaviorism and psychoanalysis speak of the interests, while humanism speaks of values. Behaviorism and psychoanalysis focus on the natural, right? Primal urges, etc., right? While humanism speak about the spiritual, let's call it, right? The reason or why we act in a way that we act and animals act in a different way, right? Behaviorism and psychoanalysis look for a reason, right? Why do I want to hit him? Oh, because he upset me. Well, why am I acting in a certain way? Oh, because I'm going to get reward or a punishment, right? Versus in humanism, we're talking about purpose. We look for a purpose. What am I getting out of it? What for? What am I doing this for? What's the reason behind that? Okay? And finally, in behaviorism and psychoanalysis, we're talking about the question that we ask is why? Why am I doing that? Why do I want to hit him? Why am I acting in a certain way? Oh, it's because I'm looking for a reward, or because it's a urge, right? Versus humanism, the question is what for? It's not why, it's what for. Okay? Now that we understand that, let's move on.
What does what for mean?
What am I gaining? What's the purpose? What is it that at the end result I'm gaining from that? Is it good for me or not good for me? Is it good for society? It's not good for society.
Okay.
It's not why am I doing it, but what's the purpose of me doing it? Okay.
Aren't they similar questions? Why and what for?
No. No, the why explains why am I doing something, but it's not telling me for what purpose, or what is the reason I'm doing it. The what purpose saying what's the reason I'm doing it. It's not why am I doing it, it's like what am I gaining by doing that, or what am I not gaining by doing that. Okay? What's going to be the end game of things? Okay. With that in mind, let's continue. Okay? We're going to have questions at the end, don't worry. So the question is what the Torah says. Okay, when we have like all that stuff, it's always good to go into the sources and see what the Torah says about things. Before getting into the Torah, let's go to the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchot Teshuvah presents an approach that explains what's the motive, what behind human behavior. And he says the following. You can look at the English. I'm going to read the Hebrew here on. אל יעבור במחשבתך דבר זה שאומרים טיפשי אומות העולם ברוב גולמי בני ישראל, שהקדוש ברוך הוא גוזר על האדם מתחילת בריאתו להיות צדיק או רשע. Don't think for a second that God decides for somebody, okay, this person is going to be an evil person or a righteous person. אין הדבר כן, it's not like that. אלא כל אדם ראוי לו להיות צדיק כמשה רבנו, או רשע כירבעם. Every person has the potential to become a tzaddik, righteous like Moshe, or evil like Yerovam, or chacham, or sachal, or rachman, or achzari, or wise, or stupid, or merciful, or cruel. וכן שאר כל הדעות. ואין לו מי שיכפהו. And nobody's going to force him to be either way. ולא גוזר עליו, ולא מי שמושכו לאחד משני הדרכים. And it's not a decree from heaven, and it's not that people can pull you to different directions, etc. That's the Rambam. אלא הוא מעצמו מדעתו נוטה לאיזה דרך שירצה. But rather, it's all on me. I decide. I have the power to decide how to navigate myself, how to put myself in a certain course of life, to become wise or not, to become merciful or not. There is no such a thing as human nature. That's the Rambam. Okay? There is no such a thing as primal urges, all that kind of stuff. Whatever character traits that we have as person, it's not going to cause me to behave in a certain way. All my choices are determined by all my actions are determined by my personal actions. So the Rambam basically is not even looking for a reason for why a person is doing all that stuff, but rather the Rambam says we need to look what for. It's the purpose. Okay? And the only force that has control of me, in that case, is me. הוא מעצמו מדעתו. I, me, and myself. Okay? This is radical approach by the Rambam. Very much disagreement with psychoanalysis and probably with behaviorism. To make it simple, Rambam is a pure humanist. He says the difference between man and animal is very simple. The ability of men to act for a purpose, and that's it. And the choices have meaning. People's choices have meaning. Now, That's the Rambam. But the Torah, as we're going to see in a minute, and I'm going to bring several examples, the approach of the Torah is a little bit different. The approach of the Torah is the following, that all the three options are valid. We act or we behave based on principles of punishment, reward and punishment. We act based on primal urges that meet normal constraints, social, moral constraints. And yes, we also act based on, let's call it, principle, lofty principles, ideas, acts that reminds us constantly that we're different than animals, that we have purpose. Okay? That's what the Torah is going to show us. Now, we're going to come back to that in a second. So, but if we look at the Rambam first, you would think that the Torah is very similar to the Rambam, right? That the Torah expects us to go above our nature and make the right choices between bad and evil. And that's what the Torah says. Look at that. Here I'm in the red quote. Ha'idot yivachem hayom. I call the heaven and earth to witness against you this day. I've put before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life if you and your offspring would live. Be wise, be smart, choose life, make the right choices. That's what the Torah says. Right? So that means the fact that the Torah says that you can choose right from wrong means that we have the ability to choose. And the fact that the Torah demands us to choose life, take into account that some others will make the wrong choice and they will choose death. Okay? But the idea is we have a choice and a person should move forward with a purpose, not making choices or not being, so to say, activated by instincts. So it seems that if we read only this pasuk, it seems that the Torah agrees with the Rambam. Act out of ideology. Strive for the right values. But it's not that simple. The Torah is much more complex. As I said, the Torah is going to combine all those approaches that we act based on principles of reward and punishment. We do act based on urges, and those urges are in tension. They have tension with social and moral norms and constraints. And yes, we act based on ideology and spiritual and lofty ideas. Let's look into that. From the very beginning, the Torah shows all that duality. The story of Noah. I'm going to read the Hebrew. You can follow in the English here. God says to Noah, go into the teva. Because I saw that you are righteous. Because in 7 days I'm going to start the flood. It's going to go for 40 days and 40 nights. And I'm going to destroy all this world that I've created. And Noah indeed does what God commanded him. And Noah and his family go into the teva. Why? Because of the water of the flood. Okay? When he was 600 years old, blah, 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 in the second month, on the 17th of that month, on that day, the flood started, the water started coming. and it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. בעצם היום הזה בא נוח בשם וחם ויפת בני נוח ויש את נוח ושלושת בניו איתם על התיבה, and that day Noach came into the teva, him and his family. Okay, here's my question. Noach was commanded by God to build an ark and go into it. Okay? What's the ideal here? What's the idea here? That Noach is going to continue mankind. God says, I'm going to wipe out the entire universe. You're going to be survived. Mankind is going to be saved because of you. But in the moment of truth, when the rains is about to start and the water is coming, the Torah kind of depicts it in a kind of like double way and very unclear way, the reason why Noach got into the into the ark. On one end, we read that the Torah says that God says to Noach, go you and your family into the ark. And the Torah says what? That what? Noach fulfilled. Noach listened to God. On the other hand, the Torah says that what? At the end of the day, Noach got into the teva, into the ark, mipnei mei hamabul, because of the flood. So God tells him, go into the teva a week before the water started coming. At the end of the day, only when the water started coming down, the rain has started, only then he goes into the ark. So what is it that the Torah is trying to show us here? Right? In other words, was he just running away from punishment like the animals? He doesn't want to drown. Water is coming, and therefore he goes into the teva. Or rather, he is a tzaddik tamim. He's a righteous person who listened to God. The Torah doesn't tell us. The Torah doesn't tell us what, where Noach falls. Is he follows the command of God, or he's going into the ark because of survival? The Torah leaves it very, very unclear. Next. Skipping to Abraham. Remember, Abraham is going to make the journey from Haran to Eretz Israel. I'm going to read the Hebrew here. You can look at the English. God says to Abraham, go, lech lecha, go from your land, from your native land, from your father's home into the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, I'll make you great, and you will be a blessing. And Abraham goes as God commanded him. Abraham takes Sarai and his family and all their possessions, and they go to Canaan, and they go and they reach Canaan. Wow. Amazing. Abraham here, God tells him, go. He packs up and he goes, right? Well, not so clear. Because if you go one chapter back, you see the following. ויקח תרח את אברהם בנו ואת לוט בן הרן בבנו, ואת שרי כלתו של אברהם בנו, ויצאו אותם מרכזים ללכת ארץ הכנען ויעברו את חרן וישוב שם. What? Terach, Abraham's father, packs up the family, and they go from Ur Kasdim to go where? To Canaan, to Eretz Israel. ויעברו את חרן וישוב שם, and they got stuck in Haran. Meaning, who started the journey to Israel? It's Terach, it's not Abraham, it's his father. So what's going on here? Is Abraham following his father's footsteps, continuing the journey that his father started, or he's listening to God and he's following what God told him. The Torah doesn't tell us why Terach decided to go to Canaan. Okay, we don't see anywhere that Terach actually recognized even God. Maybe it was economic reasons. I don't know. In the past, we kind of mentioned that Terach, that perhaps there's another reason that Terach was persecuted by his people, and therefore he decided to go to Eretz Israel. It doesn't matter. The point is that we don't know why exactly Terach started that journey. But we do have to take into consideration the fact that Abraham didn't start that journey. He continues that journey that his father started. So here's the question again. Did Abraham go to Israel because he was commanded by God? Or perhaps he's just continuing his father's journey? Did Abraham, by the fact that he's going to Israel, he's making that chidush, he's making that, that's a novel idea that he's listening to God, he's recognizing God, he's the father of monotheism? Or perhaps he's just continuing what his father started for economic reasons or who knows what. Nothing to do with believing in God. But what was the force that made Abraham go into that journey? Was it ideology, values that we see in the command Lech Lecha because God told him so, and Veheye Bracha, and you could be a great nation and I'm going to get you the blessing? Is it those values? Or perhaps it's necessity. He had to go because of whatever reason that his father felt that he needs to go. So it seems that also when it comes to that particular case, the Torah doesn't really give us a clear idea whether it's behaviorism / psychoanalysis or humanism. Let's move on. Skipping to Yaakov. Also, when it comes to Yaakov, and we have here two stories in the case of Yaakov.
Excuse me, Rabbi, for one moment, please. Does
Yes.
it say in the Tanakh?
I'm sorry?
Does it say in the Tanakh that Terach also went to Canaan?
Miriam,
Yes.
I can't really hear you. So how about, I think it's going to be like better when I stop sharing like the slides and we'll do it then. It's just that I can't hear you. It doesn't come out.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
It's okay. Thank you. Okay. When it comes to Yaakov, we have the following also. Remember Yaakov taking the bracha, the blessing, right? He tricks Isaac, whatever that means. Remember that story? Okay, and he gets the bracha, he gets the blessing from Yaakov, from Yitzchak. And then what happened? וישום עשיו את יעקב על הברכה שברכו אביו. Esav has a grudge against Yaakov because of the blessing that Yitzchak gave him. ויאמר עשיו אל ליבו, יקרבו ימי אבל אביו והרגה את יעקב אחיו. And he said, well, I'm going to wait for now, but as soon as my dad is dead, I'm going to kill Yaakov. And Rivka finds out, ותשלח ותקרא ליעקב בנה הקטן, ותאמר אליו, הנה עשיו אחיך ונחם אליך להורגך, ואתה בני שמע בקולי, וקום ברך לך אל לבן אחיך הרענה. And she says, listen, your brother is planning to kill you. So here's what I want you to do. Go, run away to my brother, i.e. in Haran. Lavan in Haran. וישבת עמו ימים אחדים ותשב שוב בחמת אחיך עד שוב אף אחיך ממך ושכח את אשר עשית לו ושלחתי לקחתיך משם למה אשכל גם שניכם יום אחד. He said, I'm going to send you, I'm going to call you. I'm going to call you back. I don't want you to die. Your brother is going to kill you. So what is the reason, based on this text, what is the reason that Yaakov is going to go to Haran? Survival. He wants to live. He doesn't want to be killed by Esau. Right? But before he leaves, we read the following here in the blue quote. ויקרא יצחק אל יעקב ויברך אותו ויצא בו ויאמר לו תיקח אישה מבנות כנען. יצחק calls Yaakov and gives him a blessing and said, do not marry a local girl. קום לך פדן ארם ביתה ביתו אל אבי אמך וקח לך משם אישה מבנות לבן אחי אמך. Go to the house of your uncle and find a nice girl from there. ואל שדי יברך אותך ויפרחך וירבך ואת אל גלמים ותן לך ברכת אברהם ולך ולזרעך אתך לרשתך את ארץ מגוריך, and God is going to multiply you and going to bless you. אשר נתן אלוהים לאברהם וישלח יצחק את יעקב וילך פדן ארם אל נבל בתואל הארמי, אחי רבקה הם יעקב ועשיו, and indeed Yaakov goes to Haran. I'm sorry, to Padan Aram. So what's going on here? Is Yaakov going to his uncle, to Lavan, because of survival, as the way Rivka presents it? You want to live? Get out. Run away. Or it's something else. It's something also about, values. What's the value? Well, find a wife. I want you to go. There's no threat. In the blue quote here, there's no threat from Esav. It's not about survival. It's about listening to your father. It's about going and finding a suitable wife as your father commands you. Okay? Values or survival. Okay. Next. And we're back in the story where we started. Remember when Yaakov decides to leave Haran and go back to Eretz Israel and his dispute with Lavan. Remember that's the beginning of the class. We talked about that. We compared that, Lavan and Naval. David. Here's the story. Vayar Yaakov et bnei Lavan. And Yaakov see, here you have the quote here in the bottom in English. Yaakov see that his father-in-law Lavan is not looking at him in the same way. And God appears to Yaakov and says to him, go back to Israel. And he goes and he calls his wives. I see that your father is looking at me in a crooked way, and also God appeared to me. And the angel of God appeared to me, and he says to me the following, and the angel told me it's time to pack and go back to Israel. Okay? So what's going on here? It's the same question. What motivates Yaakov to go back to Eretz Israel? On one hand, the Torah tells us that Yaakov is disturbed by the change of relationship or the change of heart or whatever you want to call it, the way Lavan looks at him. Right? He feels that something is not like the way it used to be. And that's what he says to his wives. But immediately after that, the Torah tells us what? That the angel appeared to me, and God commanded me to go back to Eretz Israel. So, and not only that, he also says to Rachel and Leah, to his wife, he said, "Oh, it's the same God. Like, I made that deal when I left Eretz Israel on the way, like 21 years ago, that I'm supposed to come back." So we have the two motives. Is it because of the relationship with Lavan that are not so great anymore? Or is it because of God? God is telling me to go back. Okay? Are we talking about survival because I need to run away or leave Lavan? Or it's because I'm answering to a higher call, to values, to the command from God? Okay? Ideology. The actions of Yaakov here are determined by both. Survival and values. Next. Remember the story of Joseph and the brothers. So they hate him because of his dreams. They're jealous of him, and they want to kill him. Remember that? ויאמר איש אל אחיו ונבהל החלומות הזה בא ואתה נערכו ונרגיע ונשלחים ואחד דברו ואמרנו חיה רעה חדה אותו ונראה מה היו חלומותיו. Let's kill him. That's what they say. Let's kill him. What happened then? ויאמר עליהם ראובן אל תשפכו דם למען נציל אותו. Reuven has a plan. Reuven said, don't kill him. Reuven wants to save him. Do they listen to Reuven? No. And then comes Yehuda. ויאמר יהודה, מה בצע כי נהרוג את אחינו וכיסינו את דמו? לכו ונמכרנו לישמעאלים בידינו אל תהי בו. Meaning, and then it says, וישמעו אחיו. In other words, the plan of Reuven was rejected. The plan of Yehuda was accepted. Why? Because Yehuda understands the motives, all motives that are in human behavior. Reuven approached the values. He says, you need to spare his life. Al tishpechu dam. Don't spill blood. A request, lo nakenu nafesh. Let's not murder him. Okay, that's the values. It's the right thing to do, Reuven says. Yehuda says the same thing, right? He approached, like, he talks to their values, to the ideology. Like he says, it's the wrong thing to do also. It's achenu besarenu. He's our brother. He's our own flesh and blood. But unlike Reuven, Yehuda says something else. He says also, what's the value? What are you getting out of it? What are you getting? Your gain. What are you getting out of it? Ma betza ki naharog et achinu. Meaning, what's the profit that we're gaining? What do we get out of it? Right? Yehuda says towards his brother, to his brothers, he says, if we're going to kill Yosef, we gain nothing. But if we're going to sell him, we gain some money. So he says, it's the right thing to do, but also we have personal gain. We get some money. And of course, they accept his words. They don't accept what Reuven says. Because this combination of value together with the physical need, let's call it, or the earthy need, or whatever you want to call it, the personal gain, that's both forces together in the human soul. Okay, that's what both humanism, together with behaviorism, together with psychoanalysis. It's what do we, right? It's the reward and punishment. It's what for? And it's also that urge that I have to kill him because he's annoying. Right? So it's combining all three together. Which takes us to the next example. Also, when it comes to Moses, we see about a case that we have two different, perhaps, motives for the same action. So remember, Moshe runs away from Mitzrayim, and he finds refuge in the house of Yitro. And then he lives with Yitro, and then he goes back to Mitzrayim. And God appears to Moshe in the burning bush and tells him, go to Egypt and take Bnei Israel out of Mitzrayim. But Moshe refuses, right? I'm here in the top. Go take my people out of Mitzrayim. Who am I to go to speak in Paro? I can't do that. Who am I? But in spite of his refusal, eventually, we know how the story ends. He goes ahead and he goes to Mitzrayim. But it's not clear why he's going there. Because when we read a description that Moshe leaves Midian to go to Mitzrayim, here's what we see. I'm here in the yellow, in the bottom quote here. I want a family visit. I want to check on my family in Egypt. I want to see if they're okay, if they're still alive. And Yitro says to him, okay, go get sent ahead. No problem, go. ויאמר אדוני אל משה במדיין, לך שוב מצרים, כי מתו כל האנשים המבקשים את נפשך. Not only that, if you think that this is just an excuse that he's going to tell his, cover up, that he's going to tell his father-in-law, God himself tells him, go back to Egypt. Why? כי מתו כל האנשים המבקשים את רעתך. All the people, for all the men who wants to kill you are dead. It's safe for you to go. So we have the backstory. We read about the burning bush. We know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded Moshe to go and take out Bnei Israel out of Mitzrayim. But what he says to Yitro is something totally different. It's a family visit. So there's this cloud. It's uncertainty. What is the reason that Moshe is going to go to Mitzrayim? And not only that, HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears to him and says, Metu kol ha'anashim hamevakshim et nafshecha. All those people who are trying to harm you are dead. Well, that is relevant if indeed he's going on his own mission on a family visit, not if he's going to go because God commanded him. Again, the Torah shows us a motive that has to do with reward and punishment versus something that is values. Okay? The theories or the school of thought in psychology kind of clashes again and again when it comes to the story of the Torah. And it seems that unlike the Rambam, and the Rambam, just reminding you, is very much in line with the humanistic approach, the Torah itself is much more complex. The Torah recognizes, let's call it double motives or multiple reasons or explanations for human behavior. A person is not only spiritual. A person, a human being, is not only acting because of values, ideology, command from God. On the other hand, humankind are not animals. Animals are looking to gratify, they're hungry. They're going to go and find food. They're going to kill for that or whatever. Or even primal urges. Everything is, as we call, one balagan. When it comes to human being, the Torah tried to send us a very strong message. It's a constant battle. Everything is there. And perhaps what the Torah is trying to teach us, that when we look at Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, that this combination of the earthly with the spiritual, that what makes a humankind. We're making our decisions. We act the way we act because of primal urges, but it's also because of right and wrong. It's also we're moved by values and social norms and moral and ethics and reward and punishment and self-actualization and constraints that always in battle with our urges. And we have to, and sometimes we think about our consequences, and sometimes we don't think about the consequences. But all that stuff together, unlike modern psychology, to try to separate things and say, that's the reason why we act the way we act. The Torah has a different message. The Torah says, it's everything. Human beings are much more complex. You can't explain it only by language of reward or punishment, or values, or right or wrong, or constraints, or urges, and that kind of stuff. It's everything together. That's what it means to be a human being. It's that constant battle. It's that constant movement between right and wrong, and what should I do, and why should I do it, and what for, and what am I gaining it, and am I doing it for the right reasons, or I'm not, and all that battle, that constant balagan is what motivates human behavior according to the Torah. Okay, gonna stop that. And now I think we'll be able to hear better if somebody has questions.